Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to cut through all the information noise, to take these huge, complex ideas and really distill them down to what matters for you.
Experience a unique two-voice AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Today, we are getting into maybe the most foundational idea of all, truth. We're drawing from this incredible synthesis of thought found in the Syntopicon tradition.
And our journey really is to unpack why the book treats truth not as some abstract thing to debate, but as the sovereign standard.
Sovereign standard, I like that. So if you want to judge any other big idea, goodness, justice, even beauty, you first need a stable, impartial standard to decide if those claims are even valid to begin with.
It's the absolute bedrock. That's really the core argument in the book. Adler's premise is just so clear. Truth is not something we create. It's not a consensus we vote on.
It's discovered.
It's discovered. And, crucially, it possesses immutability. It stays the same, even when our own judgments about what we think is true shift over time.
And they do shift, sometimes wildly. That idea of immutability, though, is so powerful. It suggests there's a stable reality that exists no matter what our current scientific models or cultural ideas are.
Well, think about why that's so critical for what the book calls the great conversation of philosophy.
Okay.
If truth were just subjective, if it changed with every person or every century, then Plato and Aristotle and Kant, they couldn't really be talking to each other. They'd just be voicing their own separate, incomparable perspectives.
They'd be talking past each other across the ages.
Exactly. But because they're all grappling with the same reality, with the same objective standards, they can genuinely agree, disagree, and build on each other's work. It's why an argument from 500 BC can still feel so relevant today.
Okay, so let's start climbing. If truth is this stable, sovereign standard, the book provides a structure, a way to manage the information overload we all feel. It's an epistemic hierarchy.
It is. The book gives us a very explicit ladder, which is incredibly useful. It moves from the least certain kind of belief up to the most complete and systematic. And this framework, right away, helps you avoid treating a weakly held belief as if it's some universal fact.
It forces you to classify things. So what's on the first lowest rung, the one we probably see most on social media and in daily chats?
That would be opinion. And the definition is simple. It's fallible belief. It's a judgment, a claim we hold that is open to error and just hasn't been verified enough.
So it's tentative.
Very tentative. It's a state where the evidence might lean one way, but you have to be ready to revise that judgment the moment new facts come in.
So my strong feeling that my favorite team is going to win it all this year. That's firmly in the opinion category. It's a fallible belief. But what happens when that belief starts to get stronger, when the evidence really starts to build?
Well, that's when you start moving up the ladder to knowledge. The book defines knowledge as truth beyond reasonable doubt.
And that's a key distinction, isn't it? It's not beyond all possible doubt.
No, that's a skeptical dead end. That paralyzes any kind of inquiry. It just means a truth that's been so rigorously tested, with so much evidence and logical coherence behind it, that accepting it is warranted for all practical purposes.
Let's pause there. In day-to-day life, knowledge is what we rely on for the big things. The structural integrity of a bridge, a medical diagnosis from a doctor. It's information that has been vetted to a very high standard.
Precisely. You move from opinion, which is just a personal hunch, to knowledge, which is validated certainty that ought to be shared, but just collecting a bunch of individual truths isn't enough.
Right, you can have a lot of facts without seeing the big picture.
And that brings us to the next rung, understanding. Understanding is the grasp of systematic relations among multiple truths.
So it's the difference between having a list of ingredients and knowing the recipe. Can you give us an example of having knowledge without understanding?
Sure. Think of a medical student who has memorized hundreds, maybe thousands of facts. That's knowledge. They know the symptoms, the diseases, the chemical reactions. But until they can integrate all of that into a coherent system.
Until they see how it all fits together.
Exactly. Until they see how one gene mutation causes a whole cascade of effects, they lack clinical understanding. Understanding is about seeing the structure, the dependencies, the system as a whole. It's knowing the map, not just a list of random street names.
That's a great distinction. Understanding gives you the context, the why. So if that's the systematic arrangement of truths, what's at the very top of Adler's ladder?
At the pinnacle, you have wisdom. Wisdom goes beyond just understanding how the world works. It's defined as the right ordering and application of truths toward the highest ends.
So wisdom is where truth finally connects with action, with morality, with purpose. It's not just an intellectual exercise anymore, it's existential.
It is. If knowledge tells you what is, and understanding tells you how it works, wisdom tells you what to do with it. It involves making judgments about what goals are truly worth pursuing and how to use all your knowledge to achieve those highest goods, whether that's for yourself, for society. It's the synthesis of intellect and character.
That entire framework opinion, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom is such a valuable tool. It forces you to classify every claim you hear. Is this just a weak belief, or is it a validated truth being applied effectively?
And it has to be a continuous process.
Yep.
The whole point is to constantly push claims up that ladder from mere opinion toward validated knowledge and structured understanding, and then hopefully to apply them wisely.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational structure by going back to the beginning. To really get the book's approach to truth, we have to look at its roots. Plato and Aristotle. They set up two complementary but very distinct views of where truth actually lives.
And this is really the ancient split, isn't it? The one between the transcendent and the immanent that has shaped so much of Western thought. The book does a masterful job of integrating both.
So let's start with Plato. For him, truth is fundamentally transcendent. Can you explain his theory of the forms and why he was so suspicious of the everyday world we see around us?
Plato was obsessed with stability. He argued that if truth is going to be real, it has to be anchored in a realm of unchanging eternal forms. And these aren't just ideas in our heads, they are external realities, perfect blueprints, the form of justice or beauty itself, or the perfect circle.
And these forms are actually more real than any particular example we might see.
More real, more objective. So any beautiful flower you see, or any just act, or any circle you draw on a piece of paper, those are all just flawed, temporary copies of the perfect form that exists somewhere else.
So the physical world we experience with our senses is constantly changing. It's a world of becoming, as he put it.
Precisely. It's a world of decay and shifting appearances. So Plato's reasoning was, you can't ground stable, absolute truth in something that's always in flux. You can't build your house on shifting sand.
And this is where his famous cave allegory fits in, right? Our senses are basically just showing us shadows on a wall. So how do you ever get to genuine knowledge if your senses can't be trusted?
For Plato, genuine knowledge, real contact with truth, requires the soul to turn away from all that sensory noise and turn toward the stable realm of the forms, using pure rational insight. Education, for him, was this radical turning of the soul.
A painful process, as he described it.
A painful process of dragging yourself out of the cave of sense perception to see the light of eternal truth. Error, then, is simply a failure to see beyond those flickering shadows.
That gives truth this incredible metaphysical stability, anchoring it completely outside of us. But Aristotle, he fundamentally changes that picture. How do you bring truth down from that transcendent realm into our world?
Aristotle basically brought truth into the lab. He focused on the mechanics of how we make judgments and gave us the classic formulation of the correspondence theory of truth. Truth is saying of what is, that it is, and of what is not, that it is not.
It's so simple, but so powerful and practical. It makes truth something you can actually test.
Indeed, a statement is true if it matches objective reality. But the mechanism is totally different from Plato's. Instead of forms existing in some separate heavenly realm, Aristotle says the forms are within the things themselves. The form of humanity is integral to the actual physical human being.
So the reality we're judging is right here, accessible to both our senses and our intellect working together.
Correct. For Aristotle, truth emerges from this complex, verifiable relationship between three things: the intellect making a judgment, the language used to express it, and the objective reality, the being that the judgment is about. His method is what supports empirical science, this idea of studying many particular trees to understand the universal nature of the tree.
This is why the Syntopicon's integration of the two is so brilliant. The book insists you don't have to choose between Plato's high-minded ideal and Aristotle's rigorous logic.
Right. The Adlerian method treats them as co-equal, as complementary sources you need for a complete picture. You need Plato to guarantee that truth is immutable and transcendent, that it's stable and independent of our minds. But you need Aristotle to give you the logical and empirical tools to actually verify truth claims here in the observable world.
So the enduring reality of truth is Platonic, but the disciplined process of discovering it is Aristotelian.
And that synthesis, honoring both the ideal of eternal stability and the messy, empirical work of human discovery, is really what grounds the book's entire framework for rational criticism.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Once you have that stable Greek foundation, how did later thinkers handle it? Especially as they started grappling with monotheism and the rise of scientific skepticism. That synthesis must have been challenged right away.
It was, but first it was actually adopted and adapted quite successfully. The first major synthesis came from thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas. They kept Plato's link between truth and an eternal divine source. God essentially became the ultimate Platonic form, the source of all being and truth.
So that guaranteed the immutability that Plato was looking for.
It did, but they didn't throw out Aristotle. They used his tools, his logic and metaphysics, to explain how finite human minds, working in this physical world, could still make true judgments about it. They used observation and logic, Aristotle's toolbox, to bridge the gap between eternal divine truth and our temporal human knowledge.
And that framework held for centuries. But then you get the modern reworking, which starts to chip away at those external anchors from both Plato and Aristotle. What was that big shift?
Well, the seismic shift is really associated with Immanuel Kant. He completely relocated the source of truth. Instead of asking how our judgments correspond to some external reality, he centered truth within the conditions of possible experience.
This is his famous Copernican revolution in philosophy, isn't it? Shifting the focus from the object being known to the subject who is knowing.
Exactly. The focus moves from the properties of being to the structure of the human mind itself. Kant argued, we can only know reality as it appears to us, structured by our own innate cognitive categories like space, time, causality. So truth becomes less about external reality and more about our shared internal cognitive wiring.
That definitely loosens the Platonic anchor of an absolute external truth. It makes it dependent on the universal structure of the human mind. And if Kant anchored truth in the mind, the next wave of thinkers tried to unmoor it completely.
That's when you get to figures like Nietzsche and the existentialists. They radically challenge the whole ideal of a timeless, disinterested truth. They argue that it's often just a mask for something else.
For power or perspective.
Exactly. They stressed interpretation, power dynamics, historical context, suggesting that what we call truth often just serves some deeper psychological or political goal.
But if truth is just a useful interpretation, we risk spiraling back into radical opinion where no rational agreement is even possible. How does the book respond to that kind of powerful modern critique?
The book offers this really brilliant, elegant philosophical move. It argues that even these radical critiques claims about power or history or psychology themselves have to presuppose some standard of truth or untruth to even make their case.
Meaning, for their argument about the illusory nature of truth to work, they have to claim that their argument is in fact true.
Precisely. If Nietzsche asserts that truth is just an illusion serving the will to power, he is implicitly asking us to accept the truth of that assertion. So the very act of making a critique, of trying to convince someone that their beliefs are false, acknowledges the power of the standard you're trying to tear down. The book concludes that even the most radical skeptic remains within the orbit of the great idea of truth.
That's a powerful position. It means the real argument isn't about whether truth exists, but about how we find it, how we verify it, and how we maintain it.
Yeah.
So what does this whole history mean for us today? The book boils it down into a practical toolkit. 3 mutually reinforcing tests for assessing any claim.
And this is the real practical payoff. These 3 tests ensure that rational criticism never just relies on one method of verification. It provides a system of checks and balances against our own biases and errors.
All right, let's start with test number 1, correspondence. This is the one that grounds all of science and most of our everyday knowledge.
The correspondence test says a claim is true if it matches reality. It's pure Aristotle. It asks, does the statement align with the objective state of affairs? Its application is what grounds all empirical inquiry.
So if a scientific hypothesis predicts a specific result and the experiment confirms it, it passes the test.
It gains weight, yes. In this age of misinformation, correspondence is really just fact-checking. You check the claim against the verifiable world. But as we saw with Plato, not all truths are purely empirical, and relying only on correspondence can lead you astray.
How so?
Well, an isolated correspondence can be misleading. You might observe a perfect statistical correlation, say, between rising ice cream sales and an increase in shark attacks. That corresponds to the data, but it lacks deeper meaning because you're missing the hidden variable.
The summer heat, which causes both.
Exactly, which is why you need test number 2. Coherence.
Coherence sounds like it demands logical integration.
It does. This test asks if a set of claims fits together without contradiction and if it aligns with other already established truths. Coherence is all about rational unity and logical structure. It's the test of systematic thinking.
So, To use your earlier example, if I come up with a new economic theory, but it relies on principles that directly contradict fundamental, verified laws of mathematics, it fails the coherence test. It doesn't matter how well it seems to correspond to a tiny slice of economic data.
That's a perfect illustration. Coherence forces you to integrate new ideas into the whole web of verified knowledge. A claim that contradicts established science, or even worse, its own internal premises, fails this test. It ensures our body of knowledge is a consistent, sustainable whole.
Okay, so we've got matching external reality with correspondence and fitting logically into our system with coherence. Now for test number 3, the pragmatic test. This one often raises some flags, doesn't it? People worry it just reduces truth to whatever is useful.
It can, if it's misunderstood. The pragmatic test suggests a claim gains credibility when acting on it reliably works in practice. It brings the utility and the consequences of a belief into the verification process.
But isn't that a slippery slope? Doesn't reducing truth to what works abandon that objective anchor we were talking about in favor of just short-term convenience?
And that is the crucial distinction the book makes. The pragmatic test does not reduce truth to mere utility. Instead, it recognizes the evidential weight of consequences. It asks, does this claim consistently allow us to predict, control, or interact successfully with reality?
I see. So if an engineering theory consistently allows people to build bridges that don't fall down, that practical success is powerful evidence that the theory is also coherent and corresponds to reality.
Precisely. The pragmatic test is the final layer of evidence. It confirms that the claim not only matches the facts and makes logical sense, but that it also survives long-term application in the real world. For a claim to be fully validated, all 3 tests must work together.
So if a claim corresponds to reality, is coherent with what we already know, and is pragmatic, it works reliably, it has satisfied the full rational standard. You know, this discussion on rational criteria is exactly the kind of thing we explore on our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments. It offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought. We really encourage you to check it out. So moving beyond just objective facts, the book really stresses that truth governs not only what is, but also what ought to be. It says we have to apply these same rigorous tests to ethics and to civic life.
This connection is absolutely central. It's established through a concept called moral reciprocity. The book explicitly takes the golden rule, treat others as you would wish to be treated, and uses it as a rational test for ethical truth.
But how does the golden rule work as a rigorous philosophical test, and not just, a nice sentiment?
Because ethical principles must be universalizable. This means any moral rule you propose has to be applicable equally to yourself and to others, especially under conditions of role reversal. A claim that an action is just has to be something you could rationally accept, even if you were the one negatively affected by it.
That's a huge barrier against self-serving ethics. So if I propose a policy that benefits my group but harms another, I have to ask myself, if the roles were reversed, would I still agree that this policy is fair and true?
Exactly. If a claim about justice fails that test of universalizability, if you couldn't stand to be on the receiving end of it, then the ethical claim is considered defective or untrue. It grounds ethics not in shifting cultural whims, but in the rational requirement for consistency and equal human dignity.
And this leads directly into civic responsibility. The book is very clear that the search for truth is essential for a functioning republic.
Yes, it links truthful public discourse directly to the aims you see in the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, to form a more perfect union, establish justice, secure liberty, and so on.
And how does untruth erode those goals?
Well, you can't genuinely achieve those things if your public debate is based on known falsehoods or internal contradictions, or on claims that systematically disrespect the dignity of some citizens, which would violate moral reciprocity. That kind of discourse moves the union away from justice and liberty. So, a civic test for any truth claim is, does acting on this help us achieve those common goods?
Now, what about religious claims? This is often where modern frameworks either dismiss them out of hand or give them a total pass. How does the book handle that?
It insists on intellectual fairness across the board. This means religious and transcendent claims are not just ruled out from the start. They deal with non-empirical realities, of course, but they still exist within a system of reasoning.
So how are they assessed if you can't test them by correspondence to the physical world?
They're assessed using the same rigorous standards that apply everywhere else. They must satisfy the tests of coherence, moral reciprocity, and respect for human dignity. A religious doctrine has to be internally consistent. The ethical principles that come from it must pass the role reversal test. The book evaluates the rational structure and the ethical consequences of the claim, not its metaphysical source.
That maintains the impartiality of the whole framework. The standards are universal, whether you're looking at physics, justice, or theology.
Absolutely. The book asks whether the claim is well-structured and morally sound, not whether it's physically observable.
We've covered the three major tests, but the book provides 10 specific criteria that make up the full framework for rational criticism. This is really the ultimate practical takeaway, a comprehensive checklist you can use right now to evaluate any argument.
These 10 criteria fully integrate everything we've talked about, the metaphysical stability, the logical rules, the moral demands, into one complete system. They're designed to expose a flaw at any level of an argument. It might be worth going through them.
Let's do it. Start us off with criterion number 1, conceptual clarity. This seems like the absolute starting point for any rational discussion.
It is. It demands that all your key terms, truth, fact, freedom, equality, be defined and used consistently throughout the argument. An argument fails this if the meaning of a key term shifts halfway through. If a debate uses the word capitalism to mean free markets one minute and cronyism the next, the two sides are just talking past each other.
So once the vocabulary is stable, we look at the internal structure. That brings us to criterion number 2, logical consistency.
This one is non-negotiable. Positions that have internal contradictions or that deny the very possibility of truth are self-refuting. A classic failure here is radical relativism. The statement, all truth is relative, if asserted as an absolute truth, refutes itself. The argument has to be free of that kind of internal conflict.
Okay, so if an argument is clear and consistent, we then have to look at what's supporting it. That must be criterion number 3, evidential sufficiency.
This criterion says that your assertions have to be supported by appropriate grounds. That might be empirical data, logical proofs, or historical records. The key word is sufficiency. An argument might have some evidence, but is it enough? For example, a single anecdote is evidence, but it is not sufficient evidence to prove a universal law.
Number 4 then integrates the 3 big tests we already spent time on. This is truth verification.
Right. This demands that claims be actively tested using the full toolkit: correspondence, coherence, and pragmatic success. The common failure here is relying on just one test. A theory might cohere beautifully with everything we think we know, but if it fails the correspondence test when new data comes in, it has to be revised. You have to apply all 3.
Criterion number 5 brings in the element of time and history. Contextual fairness.
This requires that we judge views relative to their own historical and intellectual context. We have to acknowledge the limitations of the time they came from. The failure here is anachronism. It's unfair to criticize Aristotle for not knowing about general relativity. His arguments have to be judged based on the best evidence and methods of his era.
Now we cross over from pure intellectual rigor into the moral side of truth, starting with number 6, moral reciprocity.
This is our role reversal test again, applied to the full framework. Standards have to honor equal dignity. They have to be acceptable even if you're on the receiving end. The failure here is systemic injustice. If a truth claim about human nature leads to the systemic dehumanization of any group, it is deemed morally untrue and rationally defective.
And the wider societal impact is criterion number 7, civic responsibility.
This evaluates a truth claim for its actual impact on justice, peace, and the common good. A claim might seem logical. It might even have some data to back it up. But if applying it demonstrably leads to the collapse of civil order or destroys essential institutions, it's considered flawed within this framework. Truth has to serve our common life.
Criterion number 8 feels crucial for today's world: epistemic humility.
This is the duty to label your claims correctly, according to Adler's ladder. You have to distinguish explicitly when a statement is merely opinion versus when it is knowledge. A failure of epistemic humility happens all the time whenever speculation is presented as established fact. It's the duty to know and to state the limits of your own knowledge.
Transparency is key to any collaborative search for truth. That brings us to number 9, transparency of method.
This criterion demands that your lines of reasoning, your evidence, your methods of testing, all of it must be traceable and open to scrutiny by others. An argument based on secret evidence or an opaque process that can't be replicated fails this test. It can't be rationally criticized, so it falls short. Transparency guarantees accountability.
And finally, the ultimate commitment of a genuine truth seeker. Criterion number 10, openness to revision.
This just means you have to remain corrigible. You have to be willing to revise your position or abandon a cherished belief if you're presented with new evidence or a better argument. dogmatism, the refusal to change your mind no matter what, is the absolute antithesis of the search for truth. This criterion demands that you remember that today's knowledge could become tomorrow's revised opinion.
That is an exhaustive and an incredibly powerful framework. It really transforms the search for truth from some abstract hobby into a disciplined, ethical, and civic practice that you can apply to everything you read or hear.
And that's what the book shows us, that this search is a lifelong effort. It demands intellect through clarity and consistency. It demands moral rigor through reciprocity and humility. And it demands civic engagement through responsibility and transparency. It's about constantly preserving, revising, and testing these ideas against the world.
If this discussion has sparked your interest in the foundational texts that built this whole journey, the book provides the ultimate reading list. We really encourage you to explore the original arguments.
You should definitely look at Plato's Republic and his Theaetetus, which get into the forms and the nature of knowledge. Then Aristotle's Metaphysics, especially his defense of the principle of non-contradiction. And Augustine's Confessions on Truth and Faith, and Aquinas' Summa Theology.
And then to trace the big disruptions in the modern era, you'd study Descartes' Meditations on Certainty, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason on the Mind Structure, and Nietzsche's later works like On the Genealogy of Morals, which really challenged the whole idea of disinterested truth.
The strength of the book's framework, the 3 tests and these 10 criteria, is that it serves as a perpetual guide. It's an objective process for correcting error, whether that error is in science, in ethics, or in politics. It gives you a stable process to use when the information confronting you feels completely overwhelming.
So here's the final provocation for you to think about. We've just outlined 10 comprehensive criteria for rational criticism. They cover clarity, consistency, evidence, and moral consequence. Considering the constant stream of arguments, news, and political claims we all face, how often do we actually apply all 10 criteria to the information we consume every single day? That practice is the true test of this great idea. Click the link on screen for the Index book summary, subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.